Good morning. I am Rick Susi, and the past post commander here at Post 7, and I'll be your MC for today. And I thank you very much for coming out in this horrible time we're having this year with the pandemic. But I think it's very important that we honor our veterans. And thank you so much for coming. So, on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month of 1918, an armistice or temporary cessation of hostilities was declared between the Allied nations and Germany in the First World War, then known as the Great War. Commemorative as Armistice Day beginning the following year, November 11th, became a legal federal holiday in the United States in 1938. In the aftermath of World War II and the Korean conflict, Armistice Day became Veterans Day, a holiday dedicated to American veterans of all wars. On behalf of Albert J. Hamilton, Post number 7 of the American Legion, I thank you for being here today to honor our American heroes. Post 7 color bearers, post the colors. Hey, oh, color. Is that arms? Order arms. Order arms. Left, hey. Order arms. The Ebb Tides Ensemble of the Bellingham Community Band, under the direction of Frank Cool, who happens to be missing. Are you out there somewhere? Frank, you made it. Are you ready? Okay. We'll now perform the national anthems of Canada and the United States. I ask all please stand. Veterans that are not in uniform are authorized by Congress to offer a hand salute. And, yes. Present arms. Order arms. So I always ask at this point, do we have any Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, Cub Scouts, or any scout that would like to come up and lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance? And please stand, and please stand covered through the invocation. Uncovered. I pledge allegiance
to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'd now like to introduce Pastor Ken Ferry of River of Life Community Church, which is in the Acme area of Whatcom County. Pastor Ferry.
Let us pray. Heavenly Father, as we gather here today in your presence to honor our veterans and their families, we thank you for this great country, the United States of America, and we thank you for every veteran that defended our freedom and way of life. We are comforted by the fact that you know every one of us by name and that you brought us home safely and here today. You know every veteran's deeds, their hard work, and their perseverance. You know each one of us also by our needs. So today I pray for physical healings, mental healings, and spiritual healings. And let every man and woman, young and old, feel the deep and appreciation this country owes them for their service. And let no one feel forgotten or neglected. Of course, we remember those who did not return, and the prisoners of war and those still missing in action. Comfort them and their families today. We ask you to bless this country, our veterans, far beyond their expectations, and reward them richly for what they have given. In his name, amen.
You may recover. We also, as normal in this part, we always invite the mayor of the city, and I haven't seen him. Mayor, are you out there? Mayor, would you like to say a few words?
Please.
Yes, he will.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here today with all of you. I'm sorry I'm not able to do this at the ordinary place. It's the City Hall lobby. It's where I've always participated in the past. Hopefully next year we'll be able to do so. On behalf of the people of Bellingham, it's my honor to convey our gratitude and thanks for the service of our veterans. I'm reminded that honoring Veterans Day is, for many, if not most of us, also honoring family. I grew up with aunts and uncles and lots of relatives who regaled me with stories of their experience during World War II. My father served in Korea. I probably would have been well served myself in retrospect if I had considered going into the military in my youth after high school, but alas, I didn't. One of the most moving experiences of my life was about 10 years ago. I was a member of the Bellingham City Council, and we have a sister city in South Korea, Cheongbu, South Korea. And there was a delegation from South Korea who was visiting Bellingham. And as a city council member and member of this committee called the Sister Cities Committee, I was invited to attend a dinner. I think it was held down at the Hearth Fire, if I'm not mistaken, in one of their conference rooms. And we had interpreters, and there were 10 of us in our Bellingham American delegation and 10 of them across the table. And I mentioned to one of the people I was from South Korea that my father served. It was just a reminder and illustration of the degree to which it's not only Veterans Day is not only an expression of the thanks of a grateful nation, but also a grateful international community. The word went around amongst the entire South Korean delegation, and they all came up to me individually and thanked me and asked me to thank my father for his service in South Korea all these years later. It was very moving. I'd like to read a Mayoral Proclamation, if I may, that I signed, honoring Veterans Day. Whereas the contribution and sacrifices of the men and women who serve in the armed forces have been vital in maintaining our freedoms and way of life, whereas tens of millions of Americans have stayed in the armed forces of the United States during the past century, and hundreds and thousands of Americans have given their lives, whereas our state is home to more than 544,000 veterans, 60,000 active duty military, 18,000 National Guard and reserves and their families. Whereas the Bellingham area is home to more than 13,000 veterans. Whereas our veterans understand the important task before the American servicemen and women now keeping watch. And whereas over 1.1 million veterans live below the poverty level, and there are tens of thousands of homeless veterans. Whereas it is estimated that up to 30% of post-Vietnam veterans have had post-traumatic stress disorder in their lifetime, and whereas veteran suicide rates are twice that of the civilian population. Whereas our veterans are brave individuals who, when duty called, willingly put themselves in harm's way to defend the lives and liberty of others. And whereas their abiding patriotism and enduring devotion to the ideals on which the United States is founded can never fail to inspire us. Now therefore do I, Seth Fleetwood, Mayor of the City of Bellingham, proclaim November 11th, 2020 as Veterans Day. In the City of Bellingham, Washington, I encourage all residents in the city to reach out to all veterans, ask them how they're doing, and acknowledge and honor their contributions and sacrifices they have made to the principles of democracy, individual freedom, and human rights, and offer assistance to veterans in need. Signed this day. Thank you very much.
I would now like to introduce the keynote speaker. He's retired U.S. Navy Senior Chief Hospital Corpsman Craig Johnson. Craig retired after a 20-year career serving on surface ships and submarines, working as a deep-sea diver for 19 of those 20 years. He served on both coasts and many oceans. He now resides with his wife, Christy, also a veteran, on his farm in Custer. Please welcome Senior Chief Craig Johnson.
To the organizers and the participants today, I sure thank you for this celebration, for setting this up, and I am so thankful for the invitation to speak to you all today. I want to thank all the veterans and the veterans' families that are out here in front of us. It's been a heck of a year for us all. We've made through some challenges. We still have some challenges to go. But I want to share with you one challenge that I have, and that's not having caller ID. It seems like Greg Breathauer calls me a couple of times a year, and I've got to get that caller ID because I got to stop answering the phone. He always asks me to talk at one of these events. So Greg, if you're out there, you're going to get some call screening work pretty soon. Again, I am so proud to be part of this organization today and to be here to celebrate and remember those of you that serve. You are of a group of all gave some. You are of a very special group, and I celebrate the bonds that we have through generations and different generations and different branches and even different periods of service, but we all have a very common bond. We all gave some. So like Rick was saying, on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, the fighting of World War I ended in 1918. This is where there were beginnings, and this is where there were ends. The beginning of Veterans Day came about after the ending of the fighting. And a hoped for forever peace was on the hearts and minds of many that day. Due to the conclusion of the war to end all wars, November 11th became a universally recognized day of celebration. The day was originally declared Armistice Day, as we've talked about, 8 years after the end of World War I, and it only honored veterans of that war at that time. In 1954, after World War II and the Korean War, it was renamed Veterans Day. And it came about to honor all veterans who served America in war and defended our democracy. So today, we honor all of our veterans who unselfishly placed their lives, your lives, on the line for our freedom. Those men and women were ordinary people just like you and me, until they heard the call of duty and they answered it. They left their families, their homes, and their lives, not for recognition or for fame or even the honor we bestow upon them today. They fought to protect our country and to maintain our way of life. Ordinary men and women placed into extraordinary circumstances. Let me share with you a story of an ordinary guy placed in extraordinary circumstances. A little bit about his life and what a life it was for one Mr. Henry Johnson. Now, Henry Johnson wasn't from around here. Let me relate to you the heroics of this veteran of the First World War, the war that was fought to end all wars, and the first war fought on a global stage. Mr. Henry Johnson was a 25-year-old railroad employee from the state of North Carolina. The morning of May 15th, 1918, found him a long way from his family's North Carolina farm. His American unit under French command, he was manning his observation post with his French Lebel rifle in hand and hunkered down with his fellow sentry, Needham Roberts. As Johnson stared off into the no man's land of France in the Argonne Forest, it's hard to say what he was thinking about. Having joined this New York unit in 1916, Johnson was a long way from home. They were mostly New Yorkers, the 369th Infantry Regiment of New York State's National Guard, and they were considered one of the tightest and toughest units to ever enter the war, as the majority of enlistees came from the same New York borough. and they had to be close. Many of the men of the 369th, which were 2,000 strong as they entered the war, their regiment part of the 15th Infantry, were a diverse mix, ranging from teenaged youths to men in their mid-40s. Some were porters, doormen, elevator operators. Some were teachers, night watchmen, and mailmen. Their motives included adventure, patriotism, and pride. Quote, to be somebody, you had to belong to the 15th Infantry, wrote one enlistee Arthur P. Davis of New York. Likely, Henry Johnson wasn't imagining his return home to cheering crowds as a true war hero in 1919. He probably didn't think about joining an American Legion post or a VFW hall upon his return. They didn't even exist. And he probably didn't think about the lobbying he would do for veterans in the government in New York State to try to provide hiring preference for those returning from the war. But around 2 a.m. that morning, his mind focused on the first sounds he heard that were unusual. Those were the sounds of snips of barbed wire. Forward observers had been trained that the first sound of an impending attack by German forces was often not the sound of shells, not the sound of rockets or rifle fire, but the sound of barbed wire being cut in the trenches that were sometimes just yards away from their position. This could usually mean only one thing: a forward direct attack by the enemy. Immediately, Johnson fired an illumination rocket into the sky. Then he ducked as German grenades flew toward him. The grenades exploded behind him and pain struck his left leg and side. Needham Roberts, his partner at post, bleeding from his head, threw grenades of his own back over the parapet. The ensuing attack by the Germans would last only a handful of minutes. But as Johnson would later relate, it felt like my whole lifetime. The German forces rushed into the Americans' dugout. Johnson shot one German in the chest, point blank, then swung his rifle to club another. 2 enemy soldiers tried to haul the wounded Roberts away until Johnson drove his 9-inch Bowie knife into one of their skulls. Another German shot Johnson in the shoulder and the thigh. Johnson lunged with his knife and slashed him down. The enemy soldiers ran. Johnson chucked grenades as they fled. When daylight broke that day later, and the field of hand-to-hand action was reviewed, it was estimated that Johnson had killed possibly up to 24 German soldiers, and that his actions had repulsed an even larger attack that would likely have shattered the line held by the 369th Infantry Regiment. Days later, Johnson and Roberts became the first Americans to receive the French Croix de Guerre, the first of many honors awarded to the 369th Infantry Regiment, better known as the Harlem Hellfighters. Yes, these 2 men were just many of the African Americans that formed up the Harlem Hellfighters. The Hellfighters, the most celebrated African American regiment in World War I, confronted racism even as they trained for war. They helped bring jazz to France with their infantry band, then battled Germany longer than almost any other American doughboy. Their nickname's origin is unclear. It was possibly coined by enemy soldiers, possibly by the American press, or likely both. like their predecessors in the Civil War and successors in the wars that followed, these African American troops fought a war for a country that refused them basic rights. Jim Crow segregation was strong, and their bravery stood as a rebuke to racism, a moral claim to first-class citizenship. Their time in France began as they were assigned to the U.S. Army's Service of Supply, unloading ships and cleaning latrines. A typical assignment for African American soldiers at the time. But General John Pershing, commander of the American Expeditionary Forces in Europe, soon offered the 369th to the French Army to solve a political problem. The French and the British were demanding American reinforcements for their badly depleted divisions. And Pershing, under the orders of President Woodrow Wilson, had insisted on forming an independent American force in France to preserve troop morale and accountability for American casualties and to strengthen Wilson's clout in eventual peace talks. Yet Pershing made an exception for the black soldiers of the 369th, reassigning them to the French on March 10, 1918. Now, Pershing's attitude toward black troops were complicated. Interestingly, he got his nickname Blackjack by serving with an all-black 10th Cavalry in 1895. But he wrote in his 1931 memoir that black soldiers needed more training because of lower capacity and lack of education. Even with the racial tensions that were so prevalent between white and black troops at the time, it was an obvious slap in the face to the 369th to be such a pawn in the politics of war. A quote from an officer of the 369th, quote, "A fairy tale has materialized. We are now a combat unit. Our great American general simply put a black orphan in a basket, set it on the doorstep of the French, pulled the bell, and went away." Histories of the regiment say the troops spent 191 days on the front lines, more than any other Americans. As part of the Meuse-Argonne offensive, in which more than 1 million American and French troops attacked the German lines, the 369th suffered some of the worst casualties by an American regiment in the war, with over 140 killed and almost 1,000 wounded. On February 17, 1919, a massive crowd filled Fifth Avenue for the Victory Parade honoring the Hellfighters. The band kicked off the procession with a French marching song full of bugles and fanfares, reported the New York World, as well as saxophones and basses that put a new and more peppery tang into their song. The soldiers marched in a French formation, 16 abreast. Johnson, who'd become one of the war's most famous American soldiers, rode in a convertible, holding a bouquet of red and white lilies and bowing to the crowds. As we honor our veterans and remember their great deeds, let us also salute those who are currently fighting for our freedom. The Cold War may be over to many of us, but the war on terrorism continues, and that war has helped us all realize how truly unique the American way of life is. The freedom we enjoy is extremely special, and that is why we must defend it. So now is the time to not only honor those who have fought and are fighting now for our freedom, it is also the time for each of us to take part in protecting it. The defense of freedom is not just for those in the military. Each of us shares that duty and that responsibility. You don't have to join the Army or the Navy or any other organization of defense to actively defend our way of life. We can protect our freedom simply by maintaining it here in America. If we want to preserve our freedoms, we must put them into action. For example, by voting in elections or speaking out against injustices. We must also ensure that everyone feels the benefits of freedom. We must defend those among us that are defenseless. And we can do that by volunteering in our communities or teaching our children what it really means to be an American. Did the country appreciate what the Harlem Hellfighters did in service in World War I? I don't know. But I can only surmise that integration back into civilian society was difficult for an all-black unit of our military. And it certainly would have been near impossible due to the racial bigotry that existed. Sometimes I hear from my veteran friends that veterans are not appreciated. That on only one day out of the year we are recognized by our communities. We get together in large settings like this on Veterans Day and on Memorial Day, and I can understand that thought as I have heard it from many veterans I served with. The country may have even heard that from members of the 369th after they returned from Europe in 1919. Their separation from community was truly racial. Suffering from racial bigotry and Jim Crow attitudes, abused and tormented through their training in the Deep South, and to fight and serve with less rights in a segregated army, these men willingly gave their lives to protect freedoms that they did not even have. And to some degree, it is true. I can understand how military folks can think that way. When you spend deployments in close contact with so many other military members, when you spend years within a community of military friends, acquaintances and co-workers, when you shop among other active duty, when your social circles include base clubs and organizations, picnics and parties in base backyards, one tends to gravitate to these types of organizations when veterans return to civilian life. And truly there is isolation. American Legion Post, VFW halls, and other veterans organizations are a comfort zone. They are familiar, a place where one can fit in. Unfortunately, if we don't venture out, if we don't reach out to the communities around us, our neighbors aren't even aware we are veterans. Not only does our service go ignored, we feel it goes unappreciated. So what are you doing now? How are you currently preserving your precious freedoms of liberty right now? The freedoms that Mr. Henry Johnson fought for in World War I. Are you voting your voice? Are you active in civic organizations? Are you advocating for our homeless? Are you providing your time, energy, and resources to feeding the hungry? Are you serving the folks among us that struggle with social issues and mental health issues? Being proud of your service is instrumental. You are part of the group, all gave some. And I encourage you all to give some more. You sacrifice some of the simplest activities to serve your country. Everyone has a story. Make your story heard. Veterans Day isn't just for veterans. It's a day for all of us Americans. It's a day to remember why they were fighting, and a day for all of us to begin our journey of protecting our freedom and the freedom of many future generations. Again, I want to thank you very much for allowing me to speak today, and I want to thank you for honoring our veterans today. Please, let us walk toward tomorrow still honoring them by living in the freedom they protected. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig. Okay, if you notice, we have our service flags right here. The Uptides will now play a medley of the Armed Services anthems. Veterans, when you hear your service anthem, please wave, honk your horn, or I know Marines and Air Force people usually get up and salute the flag. Well, whatever you'd like to do, but let us know what service you were in. A lot of you don't know the last flag there, but it's a Merchant Marine flag. There are not too many Merchant Marines left because there was only a short period during World War II where they were recognized as part of the military. So, with that, Uptides, take it away. Air Force. Navy. Coast Guard. Marines. Merchant Marine. Thank you, Bellingham Community Band, Uptides.